you very much. A couple of disclaimers. Number one, they call me chief economist because they thought that senior economist would be too redundant. I used to be a promising youngster. Now I'm a frustrating old guy. So that's why they call me just chief economist. To be chief, you need a number of subordinates that we are still looking for. Second disclaimer, in general.
Is that the job kind of offer?
Yeah, possible. Yeah. Second disclaimer, in general, when you see a discussion of a paper talking about other things rather than the paper, you should assume that that person didn't read the paper, but anyhow is doing the presentation. This is not my case, and there comes the third disclaimer. I very carefully read the paper by Rolf and Rothfuss, because these are two very old friends, influential people. I did my graduate studies at the ISS also in a previous reincarnation some time ago. Rob Foss, the co-author of this paper, is one of the most influential persons in my professional life. He was my professor. He was my supervisor of my thesis. And with Rob, we met 20 years ago, Rob, yeah, in the Global Commission of the ILO on the social dimension of globalization. That, to be honest, some of us, including Rolf, we were already warning that magic word of wonders that globalization was offering to everybody and was a stair to heaven, like Led Zeppelin song, wasn't really there, that there were a number of issues. And these issues came over and over. And that's why I decided to call this presentation, because I fully agree with the Rolf's proposal. I have no difference with any one of them, perhaps just a detail. But actually, what I will try to reinforce to you is the process of diagnostics. Yeah, and that's why I call this presentation, is this another systemic crisis of those crises that capitalism used to have every once in more than a while, it's very frequent, or we are at a new stage of the crisis of the system? Because economic analysts, they tend to focus on the last event, the last blink, the invasion of Russia, which is bringing inflation and all these problems. Or those that they have a medium-term perspective, they would warn about the COVID situation plus the invasion of Ukraine. And I would think that we didn't fully solve the problem of the 2008-2009 crisis of the subprime loans and the financial crisis. It's different, but we didn't solve it. And I'm not sure if we did solve the Latin American crisis of the beginning of the 2000s or the 98 Russian crisis. It doesn't have something to do with what's going on, or the Asian crisis of 97. So I have the feeling that this is a cumulative process, and we are reaching new stages in the crisis. Why do I say this? Why I'm trying to reinforce the diagnosis of what Rolf just said? First of all, we have a reduction on the forecast of growth. This reduction of the forecast of growth will, on the one hand, some sort of over-optimism on the other hand. Because to be honest, okay, coming out from the COVID pandemic, we saw that the recuperation was quite important in the large number of countries. If you scratch the surface, you will realize that those countries that they have stronger policies of employment retention had a better result than other countries that they spend
perhaps little money and they didn't recover employment, or like in the case of the United States, that following their neoliberal approach, they decide to tell enterprises, fire your workers, we are going to send checks to the workers to their homes, and now they are facing problems to restore their teams in order to produce again, and we are facing bottlenecks that they were not expected in the beginning. We have accelerating inflation, but this accelerating inflation, although we can blame the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, this inflation was before the invasion already there. Now it has the staggering expression of food and energy, especially energy in Europe, yeah. But also we had a very strong inflation due to bottlenecks in the production of goods, in the logistics during COVID and after COVID. Since the June 2021, we already saw that there were strong bottlenecks. And those bottlenecks weren't only generated by, we will see later, by the COVID, they were also the result of other policies. We see a problem of employment, wages, and income distribution. We can reflect a little bit more on this. And then we find the debt issue, sovereign debt, corporate debt, and also household debt. Policy interventions in the horizon are all the same, increase interest rate, and we saw what happened with the increasing of the interest rate in the United States. In August, the recuperation of employment really slowed down. The prospects were lower than they were expecting. We just finished August. And also, we start to see what is very clearly defined in Rolf's chapter and his presentation, an outflow from some countries to the United States, inflation, valuation, and further increase in the interest rate. Sorry, I'm running faster than. Okay. These are the forecast and the prospect that the IMF called gloomy and uncertain. If you see the 2021 column, we see that according to for the different regions in the world, the recuperation was important, still didn't reach, but it was important. And the prospect, the black lines for 2022 and 2023 were somehow optimistic. I'm sure that if somebody would tell you, well, what do you think about 3.5% worldwide GDP increase for long term, everybody would be quite happy. Not sure if I will be, but most of the economists, Wall Street Journal, and all the economic literature will be happy. But there we see which are the difference just from April 22 by the IMF prospect, minus 4% of that 3.2 that they expected, and minus 7.7% for the 2.9 that they projected. If you go to see UNCTAD forecast, they are much lower, 1%, 1 percentage point. Okay, what happened with food prices? These are food prices, cereals, wheat in the US, and corn. We see skyrocketing, but again, these are even before the invasion, we saw increasing prices. What happened with energy prices? More or less the same trend. Core inflation, you know, we economists tend to invent something. We make a difference between core inflation and headline inflation, yeah? Core inflation is the average of all prices, and the headline inflation is without food and energy because the volatility and all these things. Well, core inflation, this is the forecast that we see now, yeah? And this was the forecast that the IMF saw until the fourth quarter of 2021. So we see that the forecast, as they say, quite poor and good. How did we get here? Because that's a question that I think that we will try to answer and will help us to make proposals and to reinforce proposals, but also to bring some ideas. First of all, we have years of lack of productive investment. Investment during the last 15 years, at least since the subprime crisis, has been very unproductive. We have a lot of investment in research and development that doesn't translate into production in many cases. We have a lot of investment in stocks, real estate that is not devoted for the productive process, that they may increase GDP during the construction, but after you have this big skyscraper or shopping mall in Bangkok or in Hong Kong or wherever nice city, their productivity is quite low. We see investment in things like cryptocurrencies, that they are accounted as investment in the bookings of in the books of enterprises, but actually their contribution to the production is zero. Yeah, they are, I would say, that the paradigm of the silly, crazy, self-destroying capitalist system, the cryptocurrency, the currency that nobody saw, issued by somebody that you don't know, that you cannot use to buy anything, only to speculate. You have a strong appreciation of financial capital, which is also another issue. When you increase the value of financial capital, you are reducing the profit potential of productive capital. That means that the only alternative to increase the profits of appreciated productive capital would be by squeezing wages, repressing wages, because there is no other way. Taxes are there, exchange rates are there, so wages are the one that you can squeeze. You have profit grabbing, many businesses that just are rent seeking, stop buyback. Most of the companies during the pandemic that they made windfall gains because of the pandemic, they started to buy back their own shares to ignite this speculative market. So since 2010, capital productivity has been going down and labor productivity has been increasing. So if I show you, this is labor productivity. We divide the global GDP, the world GDP. This comes from the Penn tables, which is a more or less recognized source of statistics. If you divide that on the number of worldwide employed, formal, informal, those that are registered as employed, this is the trend. Every job is producing much more GDP than when you compare to capital. This is capital productivity, the GDP divided over the capital stock. We find that since 2011, 2012, after the subprime crisis, the productivity of capital has constantly been going down. And that explains the bottlenecks. That explains the bottlenecks that the induced inflation. Why they induce inflation? Because these companies that are investing in productive things, they are price setters in the world market. They define the prices that consumers are going to pay all over the world. We see a secular reduction of the employment to growth elasticity. That means how much you are going to increase employment when GDP grows. And why is that? Because there is an appropriation of the productivity by the capital. All the productivity gains, they don't go to more employment, but they don't go to more wages or real purchasing power wages. There is no sharing of the, rather fully appropriated by the capital. Why is this? Well, because, and here we as unionists, we should question ourselves to some extent. Why we don't see this process reverted. First of all, because there is a strong disciplinary power on the labor force by the outsourcing, the phantom, when they say, no, we're going to move the factory to Cambodia or to Bangladesh if you continue asking for more wages or to participate more in the issue of globalization, obviously, is one. The other, all these new non-standard forms of employment that the pandemic accelerated to some extent, but they were also there, platform economy and the Uberization of the economy, all these new ways of extracting surplus from the worker without giving any type of workers' rights. This is a major shift from the so-called traditional industrial revolution type of labor relations. And then we see a low union membership or density, especially in this new sector. Why? New sector, they tend to take a longer term into the process of organization and unionization, but also there is the fear by younger workers, that they are starting to their work in relation to, well, what will happen to my job stability if I unionize, I organize my colleagues and we try to work. We do our effort, we should continue and we should push more for that. And then widespread wage repression, because the result of all these other things is wage repression. You repress wage increase. And there, I always refer to this very interesting theater play, Waiting for Godot. Yeah, when the inflation is low and you go and you ask for an increase in wages, they will say, no, we cannot increase wages because the cost of living has been quite stable. But when inflation starts to pick up like now, and you push for higher wages, they say, no, if you push for higher wages, the inflation is going to go up. So when are we going to increase the wages? It's like Waiting for Godot. That play is very interesting. They were waiting for somebody that they didn't know when was going to come. Why should come? Who was Godot? But we should be waiting to increase the wages to this promise of future that is more religious than factual. Here we see the increase on employment worldwide, taking as a base, in constant prices, taking as a base 2005. This is the increase of GDP. When I mentioned that the elasticity of GDP to growth has been reducing, you see how employment increases at a very slower pace than what is increasing the GDP. And here, this is for developed countries. We have here real average wages and productivity, labor productivity, also taking the year 2000 as a base, and we see that only during the subprime crisis 2009 and the period of 2017-18, the productivity gains were lower, while average wages are increasing also at a lower pace. During the pandemic, what happened with corporations, and this is a graph that I took from Brookings Institution, the 22 largest corporations in the United States, they appropriated $1.5 trillion, which are the equivalent to the GDP of Spain, Australia, Italy, Brazil, Canada, and you can find many countries that are under that amount, 22 corporations. The money that they got is 50 times larger than the wage bill of the workers. So that gives you an idea of the windfall gains that they made. And then we have this issue, this is almost a side note that's quite relevant, the ABCD. Yeah, it's not that I'm learning spelling in English. Actually, ABCD are the 4 largest food exporting and food traders worldwide: ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Dreyfus, which account for between 75 and 90%, depending on the year, on the grain trade. These are the four largest corporations that they saw windful gains during the pandemic, especially now after the invasion and all the disruption of the food supply chain. ADM increased their profits, declared profits. We are talking about what they declare to their book, independent of loans, interest paid, and all these accounting businesses that they do in order to pay lower taxes. Their profits increased by 22%, Bunge 17%, Cargill 28%, and Dreyfus 80%. And let me tell you something, all these four companies that we know that where they operate, one of them is based in Delaware, two are based in Switzerland, and the other is based in Bermuda. Does it say something to you? Just fiscal heaven? Okay. Which are the mainstream instruments used to fight inflation now? Of course, the first one is the central bank increase of interest rates. The G20 countries, all of them increase interest rates except Japan. If you take 164 countries that in the IMF database, 4 countries, Japan, Bulgaria, Denmark, and Switzerland, didn't increase the interest rate. So we have a fiscal squeeze, a reduction of the fiscal deficit objective, stronger effects after the pandemic because you had a big increase on fiscal deficits during the pandemic, and all this they want to solve it with the reduction of corporate and income taxes, which will also enlarge the fiscal deficit. So, which is the name of the game? Reduce consumption. The main objective of the anti-inflationary policy in the United States and here in Europe and in most countries is to reduce the level of domestic demand by affecting not the rich ones, because they say, no, let's reduce corporate and income taxes, as if they will be shared with the prices, via prices with the population, rather reduce the consumption of those sectors that had the bulk of the consumption on food and energy. This leads to exchange rate devaluations. I'm really surprised. Well, I come from a country where our economy is quite dollarized, so minor changes in the exchange rate, they are headlines in the newspapers. But I was really surprised since I'm here in Europe, that to see that you are not very conscious how much purchasing power the euro lost against the dollar. And most of your consumption, your import, the out of the EU region, your imports are done in US dollars. And then you have some countries that impose the export restrictions to sort out the problem. I will speed up, but I want to show you the share of countries talking about debt and something that Rolf highlighted very clearly, the share of countries that issue debt with more than 10 percentage points over the US rate. If the US rate is now at 3.5%, these countries, they issue debt or bonds at 13.5%. That means that 1/4 of the countries that issued debt since 2021 are going to pay prices that are going to be unsustainable. Of course, if you are in the government and you say, okay, I will issue a bond to 5 years, 4 years is my term. Let's see, who was Louis 15 or 16 to say after me the flood or something like that. So they try to solve the immediate problem. So we find that between 2011 and 2020, external debt of emerging and developing economies almost doubled. By April 2022, the servicing of debt was $310 billion per year. The debt to export increased in 121 countries out of 127, so you need more export in order to service your debt. 51 countries have over the export over 2.5 years of export in order to attend the debt. Private debt, on top of that, is around 25% of total foreign debt. What makes the thing more complex? Because in the past we were talking about sovereign debt and was negotiation with the IMF and all these other more political things. Now you have to negotiate with private investors that they know countries don't go bankrupt. That's why all these voucher funds, they don't have any problem. They just pay lawyers to keep the things alive in the court in the United States because they know that they will be paid. Sooner or later, they will be paid. Countries don't close the windows and they run away. Countries, they always pay the debt. And the pandemic increases household debt. So we have the debt at a multiple dimension. Well, I don't want to get into this. This sounds much more complex, but it's more or less how workers and the families are affected at the end. What's happening with real wages? And here I highlighted Europe. You know, if we take December 2019 as the base, so December we assume that there was a base, we find that in almost all the countries, but in Belgium, the CPI ran faster. This is until August, until July, because we didn't have August yet, ran faster than minimum wages. And Belgium is a very interesting case because although we see that the reduction of purchasing power in most of the countries, Netherlands or the UK, Belgium is the only one that is the other way around. And that would be a way of falsifying this issue of the wage price inflation because Belgium is with Malta and, Cyprus and Luxembourg, the only countries that they have real indexation. Every 3 months, there is an indexation of wages. So if we would have wage pricing spiral, the inflation of Belgium would be well above the inflation of the rest of Europe. And when we compare the values, Belgium is among the average, even the medium. Okay, to conclude, the crisis affects workers from developed and emerging economy, and that's something that is quite new because we used to think that there was a problem of center periphery workers in Europe and in central countries. They have different problems that they were somehow milder than the workers in the global south, but now we start to see how they are affecting. Rolf show us with information of history that even at nutritional level they are affecting in both regions, something that you wouldn't expect in a developed country that could be the impact. Business as usual, that means regulate the interest rate. The interest rate is an instrument that you can modify overnight. A dozen of dark-suited members of central banks, they decided to increase the interest rate, and that would affect the overall economy. That will cause significant harm to workers and families. The debt crisis will re-emerge in developed countries in the form of sovereign debt, but also households worldwide that will require some sort of intervention for people to pay student loans, like in the United States, but also mortgages and credit card loans. And austerity policies in large central economies not only will affect those countries, but also developing countries. So the specter of stagflation is already here. Stagflation as stagnation with inflation, and austerity policies will only deepen these things. To finish, I would like to finish with a quote by the food policy lead of Oxfam, who said, well, that there is a monstrous amount of wealth being captured at the top, while we are pushing millions of people to starvation. And World leaders are sleepwalking into a humanitarian disaster. We as unionists, we cannot sleepwalk. We have to struggle not only for our workers, but also in terms of solidarity and the workers worldwide. Thank you very much.